Hi, this is Dr. Eric Fields. Today I'm discussing cravings. Now, I don't really like to use the word cravings because most of the time, a craving for us who struggle with food dependency issues is more aptly called an urge. A craving is like a nice way of saying, I really, really want to eat right now, and I don't know why. you know, I think it's appropriate to use the word craving when, like, you haven't had a food in a long time and it's a special kind of occasion, or you've been, doing really well and eating very healthy for an extended period of time, and you're in the mood for something and you have it, and that's fine. That's great. Or for people that don't have food dependency issues, it's just, a food that they haven't had for a while and now they want to indulge in it. No harm, no foul. But for us, cravings are usually urges. Now, if you think of the word urge, that makes you think more of people who have an addiction, like an addiction to alcohol or a drug or gambling or something like that. They have urges, right? Well, we're no different in the sense that we have an unhealthy dependency on food. And it's why we eat when we really aren't hungry, and why we eat for other reasons, such as trying to deal with stress, emotional difficulties, negative thoughts, memories, etc., 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 or something really serious like trauma. And of course, if you're dealing with something really serious like trauma or clinical depression, the best route for you to take is therapy and really, working on that. And you'll be surprised at how effective therapy can be so that you may really not feel like using food inappropriately any longer to self-medicate or to self-distract, from these unhealthy kinds of thoughts, feelings, images, etc., etc., etc. Okay. So getting back to the large majority of us who use food not for clinical disorders and dealing with them, but certainly using it inappropriately. We battle food urges. If you think of the word urge, the best definition is something like a feeling that compels us to do something. Now, I don't know about you, but that doesn't sit well with me. I mean, the definition matches the word urge, but me feeling compelled to eat does not make me feel really good. Because any feeling that compels us, which basically is a nicer word for forces us, any feeling that forces us to do something that we otherwise wouldn't want to do is not a good thing. That is really going down the road of not having control. And any person with an addiction does have a level um, a level of their behavior that is not in their control, not in their full control anyway, unless not without taking steps to gain control and to, be in a healthier state of mind so that they can resist these compelling feelings or urges. So, what do we do about that? What do we do when we have this urge that comes out of nowhere that tells us we should eat right now, or probably speaks to us in even stronger language, like we need to eat right now? And we're thinking to ourselves with our rational brain and saying, but we ate an hour ago. I'm pretty darn sure I'm not hungry. There's nothing special going on. Why do I feel like I need to eat? When you start figuring this out, you are on your way to overcoming this dependency issue. And you are on your way to being able to combat these urge thoughts and feelings. And an urge really does have those two components to it. First there's this feeling, which generally is one of discomfort, right? I feel uncomfortable right now, and this urge is telling me in order to relieve this state of discomfort, I have to put food in my body. And it's probably telling me something more specific, like I have to put unhealthy, fatty, sugary food into my body. But regardless, it's telling me I need to eat when I don't. So an urge is really comprised of two components: this feeling of being uncomfortable and this thought that is telling us the only way to alleviate this discomfort is to fill ourselves up with food. Okay? Now, the thought is BS. You don't ever need to fill yourself up with food whenever you're feeling uncomfortable. Just like you don't need to drink alcohol, you don't need to do drugs, you don't need to gamble, right? You don't need to do any of those things either when you're uncomfortable. And this is no different. So, the part of the urge that is valid is the feeling that you're uncomfortable. You've probably heard a lot of therapists say that before, feelings are valid. Well, in the same vein, that feeling of discomfort is valid. You are uncomfortable, okay? Where the urge lies is in its content and what it's saying about that state of discomfort, that the only thing to make you feel more comfortable is food. And an urge comes on very strongly, and it makes us feel like we're almost in this fight or flight kind of situation, right? Where it's compelling us to do something, right? We're trying to compel us to do something that we otherwise wouldn't want to do. And it's telling us we have to do this immediately. So that's the other part of the urge in terms of the thought content behind it, is not only saying that you have to eat to get rid of this discomfort, but you have to do it right now. Like you need to do something right now, and it's got to be eat. One, you don't need to do anything. You literally could do nothing, and in psychotherapy we call that urge surfing, which is kind of like not fighting it and just accepting that I have this urge, it's telling me a lie, and I don't have to do a damn thing. I can literally just sit here and wait for the wave to come and ride it out as if I'm surfing. Urges, the feelings especially, do not last long. And I tell people with very serious addictions to alcohol and drugs the same thing, that state of physiological arousal, that like state of discomfort, borderline anxiousness, right? That doesn't last so long. The body cannot maintain that level of physiological arousal for that long. And let me tell you, you are physiologically aroused when you're experiencing a food urge, because that state of discomfort is like a state of anxiety. So first off, you can certainly just sit back and ride it out, because it will not last long. So the first way I tell people to combat these urges is to distract yourself with something healthy, or neutral. Doesn't have to be healthy. It could be neutral. It could be watching the TV, listening to some music, playing with your kid. That would be obviously a healthy option. But just distract yourself with something else. And in the spirit of harm reduction, which is a philosophy that I espouse, even if you distracted yourself with something not so healthy, like let's say you have a mild online game addiction going on and you played some games, to try to ride out that food urge, which is much worse for you, hey, that's fine. If this is a bigger issue, then sometimes it's okay, I think, to do something that may not be labeled as super healthy, but is better than giving into that behavior. For most of us, simply just finding a neutral or somewhat positive activity um, will really do the trick. Now, I don't want to leave it there because that's great for dealing with that intensity and trying to like give yourself a fighting chance, so to speak. But two things. One is this is an invaluable learning experience. It's an opportunity to really learn where these food urges are coming from, like where the root cause is coming from. That is a main reason that we don't want to just let this experience pass us by and not address it. And the second thing is, if we don't really get to the root cause, it's going to keep happening. And who the heck wants to go through that discomfort all the time? And constantly try to find things to distract us, because the moment we don't find something to distract us, or we have a case of the effits, as I call it, that's it, right? So distract yourself first for a little bit. Maybe 15, 20 minutes is all you need, so that that wave, that the crest, the main part of the wave passes over you. And now you're still going to feel the remnants of that urge. It's not going to be as intense as the crescendo, but it will still be there for a little while. And so now you have a fighting chance to really address it more head on. And what I want you to do at this point is really try to figure out where it's coming from. In cognitive therapy, we basically break down unhealthy feelings into three components that we label the A, the B, and the C, the ABCs. The ABCs of cognitive therapy, in a sense, right? The A is the antecedent or the trigger, the thing that kind of starts it off. The B is the belief, our interpretation of that event, trigger, etc., etc. And then the C is the consequence. There can be behavioral and emotional consequences, right? I tell my patients to work backwards, because identifying, or at least to start with the C, I should say, because that's usually the easiest to identify. It's usually the easiest to identify, how you're feeling. Okay, it's much more tricky to identify the real underlying belief, and can be tricky to even identify the triggers, because a lot of times these urges feel like they come out of nowhere, right? So you have the consequences. What are the consequences that you are experiencing right now from these urges? Well, there's the emotional consequence, which we can just label generally the state of being uncomfortable and probably anxious. I think that's what differs urges from cravings. Cravings are more like, wouldn't that be nice? We may think that's what we're experiencing, but 90% of the time or more, what we're experiencing is, I hate this feeling, please make it go away. And that's a state of anxiety. So some kind of state of discomfort, usually anxiety. What's the behavioral consequence? Well, the behavioral consequence is eating if we give into it, right? So those are the unhealthy consequences. These are not good. We don't want to be uncomfortable, and we certainly don't want to eat when we really don't want to eat. Okay, so then the next thing is to try to think of the A, the antecedent or trigger, and the B, the underlying belief, right? I like to try and figure out the A next. I feel like that's a little bit easier. Okay, so what's the trigger? Try to think really hard about what's going on. And you're doing this exercise while the urge is still present, although the climax of the urge, the strongest period of the urge has already passed, you're still experiencing the urge though. So the urge went from you gotta eat right now, eat something unhealthy and do it now, to, you still should eat. You really should get something right now. I know you want it. I know you want to eat something. I know you probably want to eat something unhealthy. So that's kind of the state that you're in at this point after you've distracted yourself, right? So what's triggering this, right? Why are you feeling like you have to eat? What's going on? What's triggering it? What's triggering this? The trigger could be a thought, a memory, right? An idea of something, okay? So let's say there's a thinking trigger, right? Also, the trigger could be something that reminds you of something unpleasant, okay? So let's say it's a thought trigger. And the thought is, I don't like where I am in my life in terms of my career or my relationship or my lack of a serious relationship or some other thing that's going on in your life. So that's the trigger. Now, one thing that we always emphasize in cognitive therapy is you don't have much control over situations and events and even thoughts that pop into our head. A lot of times thoughts will just pop into our head and there it is. And so we don't have a lot of control over that. We don't have a lot of control over what's going to happen today or tomorrow in our lives. There's a lot of things that just happen to us that are crappy. And that includes having negative images or memories or thoughts pop into our head. So there's a thought. Okay, that's the trigger. I'm just really not happy with where I am in my life, in my career, my relationship, etc., 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 right? Now, the belief. Now, this is important because this is something we do have control over. And the belief leads to the emotional consequence of feeling uncomfortable and anxious, and the behavior of, if we give in, running to the refrigerator. So the belief is, as an example, right? First off, in order to identify the belief, the interpretation of this trigger, of this random thought that popped into our head, it has to match the feeling. I always tell my patients that. That's super, super important. Like, you're not going to have a belief like, and that's not so bad. And then you're feeling super uncomfortable and anxious and like you can't deal with the situation. That doesn't match. That's a mismatch, right? So it's got to be an intense belief. It's got to be some kind of belief that, would lead to desperate feelings and behaviors, right? Because running to the refrigerator when we're not hungry is desperate. Let's be serious, right? It's a desperate attempt to alleviate the state of discomfort that's caused by this belief. So what could this belief be? The trigger, the thought is saying, I'm not happy with my life. Well, there's nothing essentially unhealthy about that thought. That's okay to acknowledge that you're not happy about where you are in your career or relationship or etc. But now the belief, the interpretation of that, if it's unhealthy, and this part you do control, that can lead to desperate behaviors and unhealthy consequences in terms of feelings and behaviors what kind of belief would match that? I don't like where I am in my career, and I can't stand that. That drives me crazy. It upsets me to no end. I feel like my life is never going to get better. I feel like this is always going to be my life. There's no hope for me in the future. Things have been this long for a period of time. They will continue to be this long, this way for a period of time. No matter what I do, nothing's gonna change. I can't do anything to really change my life. This is just how it is. You feel your anxiety rising? Just thinking these thoughts, right? And having these interpretive thoughts, these core beliefs, as we call them in cognitive therapy, are enough to lead to all sorts of unhealthy feelings and behaviors. We need to tell ourselves from time to time, hey, Eric, you're not living life the best way. You could be doing things differently. You're not achieving your goals, or you don't have any goals right now. You're kind of just, in this, state of flux, so to speak, or limbo. And that's something that you should pay attention to and try to change, right? So having that thought that you're not happy with your life pop into your head is okay. It's a reminder of certain things. In fact, having a thought pop into your head that says, hey, remember when this happened when you were 4, and how crappy you felt and how awful that was, that's a thought. That's something in response to our life, our history. And, these thoughts that, talk to us about our past or our present or our future, they happen. And then, that's going to just happen from time to time. And sometimes they are happening for a good reason. It's like an alarm clock going off and saying, hey, you need to do something about this. And so your interpretation of these thoughts is very important. First off, you have to determine if it is actually something that's worth listening to. We have a lot of random nonsensical thoughts, or we have thoughts that are, just overly punitive, or this and that, and we don't need to pay attention to them or thoughts that are just gonna, describe negative things, and there's nothing we can take away from that that's positive, right? And so you have to make a determination. Do I do something with this thought? Is it just like white noise, right? Or is it something I really need to pay attention to? And if it's just white noise, then what we try to do is we try to say like, okay, I had this thought, it talked about a negative time in my life, or something about myself that I don't really like. I can't change that. It's in the past. And so, we try to neutralize that by, looking at all the things that we can be grateful for, or simply just ignoring it and choosing not to even address it, okay? Now, if it's a thought that is about something we can change, then our belief, a healthy belief, would be one that says, hey, you're not living life the best way right now. In terms of your career, relationship, et cetera, what can we do? Well, we can do this, and that. We can put a plan together. We can start acknowledging that this is something we're upset about. We can start coming up with some ideas in terms of how to address this issue in our life. This is all good stuff. This is a healthy problem-solving process that we should be undergoing. Now, when you have an urge that tells you, I'm uncomfortable, I gotta run to the refrigerator, and then you determine that it's from a thought that is telling you something about the way you're living your life right now that you don't like, And that then is a catalyst to go through this problem solving process where you start saying, all right, how do I address this? What can I do here? That is so much better than just running to the refrigerator and stuffing our faces, right? Because now we're actually dealing with it. And here's the thing. When you deal with it, when you problem solve, you are engaging your coping skills. When you avoid dealing with these issues, you are not using your coping skills. And just like if you had nice shapely muscles and you stopped working out, they would atrophy, right? Our coping skills atrophy if we don't use them. If we keep running to other external things to help us deal with a situation, whether it be food, drugs, booze, sex, gambling, you name it, we're never, ever, ever gonna feel equipped to handle anything. The longer that you go without engaging those coping skills that you have and developing them and exercising them, the more difficult it becomes, and the easier it becomes to make a case to just go do these other things that are short-term fixes that you're gonna feel really, really badly about the next day. Here's the whole thing. When you give in to a food urge, you don't feel good pretty much the entire time. I mean, I don't know about you, but whenever I gave into a food urge because I was trying to deal with something that I didn't want to deal with, going to the refrigerator, in my mind, I'm saying to myself, this is not good. I know I really don't want to do this. I know tomorrow I'm going to be upset with myself. And then as I'm eating most of the time, I'm saying to myself, I don't really like this. This isn't good. I'm not going to feel good about this tomorrow. There may be some brief moments of euphoria, very brief moments, or not even euphoria, but these brief moments of satisfaction while you're eating, but they're so brief and fleeting. And the backdrop to this whole experience is basically guilt, feeling upset with ourselves, knowing this isn't right. And then after we're done, it's over. And then again comes even more guilty feelings because during the experience, we kept telling ourselves, hey, let's just stop after this bite. Let's stop, let's stop, let's stop. And we kept going because we had a case of the efforts and the all or nothing thinking. And now we're really going to be upset with ourselves after we're done. And then tomorrow we'll wake up and we'll remember that experience. Probably the first thing on our mind in the morning because it's such a big thing for us. And we'll feel really crappy. And that will also increase the probability that we do it again because I already did it. Who cares? Makes it even easier to do it again. Makes it easier to do it again because we have not practiced using our coping skills. That's one of the main reasons it's easier to do it again, not just because we did it already. So this is Dr. Fields. This is something, like I said, I'm trying to focus now whenever I'm putting together some content in a video on you being able to take away some actionable step. I watched this video and here's what I'm doing right now. This is something that's really, really important. I said yesterday in my video that every so often I'm going to be putting out a video on you being able to make a lifestyle change and doing that change for several weeks and then doing another one and doing another one. This one certainly could be a lifestyle change, but I don't even want to label this that because this is so important. It's almost a non-negotiable. Like the videos that I'm putting out about the lifestyle changes are suggestions like you could do this. Oh, you don't like that? Okay, how about this one? You don't like that one? All right, no problem. What about this one? This is a non-negotiable. This is not like, here's an idea for a lifestyle change. This is absolutely something you need to do if you ever want to get a handle on this food dependency issue and these weight loss issues. This is it. If you are not using food inappropriately to deal with underlying psychological struggles, issues, emotional difficulties, I'm telling you, this alone could lead to you losing weight. This is so powerful that this alone could lead to you losing weight. I gave you a really quick kind of overview of cognitive therapy and one of the strategies that we use. Certainly, if you have questions, I can go much more in depth into this. But I think this is a good place to start. Distracting yourself when you have an urge until it starts subsiding a bit, and then going into problem solving mode. And don't worry so much about, knowing your ABCs. What's more important is that you get the general concept. You have to identify how you're feeling, and you have to identify what triggered that, and then you have to find what is bridging the two. Your interpretation of that thing, right? And like I gave you the example, the thing could be a thought. The thing could also be something external, right? It could be like a fight with a loved one, a call from the school about your son or daughter not doing so well in class. It could be an external event or situation. Absolutely. Those tend to be the easiest ones to identify, and so that's why I didn't use those examples. What's harder to identify is having a thought that becomes the event or the trigger, because I can tell you as a psychologist, we definitely do not have complete control over random thoughts that pop into our head. And, sure, as a psychologist, I acknowledge that there's an unconscious that sometimes can say, this is the time they need to have this thought. But also, sometimes I think it's just like a brain hiccup, and a random thought just comes to us, and there's no good reason, or sometimes these thoughts, there's nothing beneficial we can take away from them. And you need to acknowledge that too. Is this something I need to, adhere to the message or take something away from this and do something with this? Or is this something that's just white noise that is just making me feel crappy? And, therefore, if I have a belief like, oh yes, this thought, it must be super valid, and therefore you should feel really crappy about yourself. That again is that interpretation belief that you need to address and say, no, sometimes thoughts just pop into my head and I don't need to take them so seriously all the time, and they're not always valid. This is Dr. Fields. I hope you found this really helpful. I know this was a bit of a long video, going over half an hour. I intended it to be shorter, but I really feel this is super valuable. This is the crux of everything I believe in terms of why we struggle with weight loss and what we need to do, and this is a foundation. And so I wanted to spend a little bit more time on it today. I'll talk to you soon.